بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for joining the LMA live podcast. Today we've got Hajj Gamel Kheir to my left, the Secretary of the Lebanese Muslim Association. Assalamu alaikum, Hajj. And we've got Hajj Hafez Alameddine, the President of the Lebanese Muslim Association. Assalamu alaikum, Hajj, and welcome to the podcast. Inshallah, as usual, today's podcast is an opportunity for you to engage and ask questions directly to members from the LMA board, management and staff. Inshallah, we'll be providing some updates about some of the initiatives and programs that we've been running, as well as, answering some of the questions that maybe some of the community members might have, inshallah. Hajj Hafez, inshallah, we'll start with you. Can we get an update on the last 6 months? What has the LMA, been up to over the past 6 months?
Salam. Look, first I'll start with the Aged Care Centre in Durran Street. The last time we spoke was in construction phase. At the moment, we're actually are fully operational. We're up to 15 occupants at the moment, but we need to ramp it up. So if anyone out there has family members in other aged care centres, hopefully they can consider moving them to Amman. It's all Islamic, so anyone interested, please contact the LMA office. As everyone knows, we've also acquired 2 mosques, one in Adelaide and one in Melbourne. They've both been very successful. We're in the process of, refurbishing them to make them so we can use them for prayer halls. Young mosque construction. We started this about 2 years ago, and our completion is expected to be June this year, and we plan to have a grand opening for it. Alhamdulillah, it's come out it's a very nice mosque actually. If people have some time, go onto our Facebook page on Young Mosque and have a quick look at the progress of that mosque. In addition to that, we've secured 10,000 lots in private cemeteries around New South Wales. From Invocare. Invocare is a company owned by Macquarie Bank. We've paid a substantial deposit to secure those. There's various cemeteries, Leppington, Minchbury, Gosford, Wollongong and Newcastle. So if anyone's interested in pre-purchasing those plots, please also contact the LMA office and we can assist. We've also lodged a DA with Canterbury Bankstown Council for a youth centre next to the mosque. It's an existing car park. We've secured some funding from the government to construct a youth centre, and inshallah that probably starts in 6 to 8 months. We'll start the construction of that. Our charity Feed the World has run a couple of successful campaigns in the last 6 months. The biggest one being the Hamidi Hospital in Tripoli. We held a fundraiser in Sydney back in October, where we raised roughly 750k. So people who haven't paid, please contact the LMA office as well and pay your pledges. We've also had a campaign to build a medical centre in Burj Al Yahudiyya. That's been fully funded. We've had one benefactor who contributed half, and we collected the other half. So alhamdulillah, that was all done and dusted, and that campaign is built. That medical centre has been built and completed. We've also got a campaign for a medical centre which specialises in dealing with burns victims. That's an ongoing campaign. So if anyone's interested in donating to that, please just go to our Feed the World Facebook page. The LMA held a Gaza fundraiser in the LMA office. We collected roughly $150,000 for that. In addition to that fundraiser, we had the Ramadan fundraising campaigns for various other issues. That campaign reached Southeast Asia, Sudan, Africa, Gaza, Lebanon and others. Ramadan 2026 was very busy actually. We had numerous events, and I'll deal with them one at a time. Before I start, I want to thank all our volunteers and staff. If it wasn't for them, we couldn't make anything happen, to be honest, if it wasn't for them. We average 1,500 people per night for 3 weeks, every night. We had our second open community iftar, and alhamdulillah, we had 4,000 people attend. Next year, inshallah, will be a lot bigger, and hopefully we can plan it a bit better, but it's a learning curve for us all. We held Tarawih in Holden Street in conjunction with Canterbury Bankstown Council and a Human Appeal. And we had over 1,000 people there, and all the boys actually and the girls from the LMA volunteers were there to help. Again, Laylatul Qadr, we had roughly about 10,000 people rock up through the evening. A special thank goes out to Fatali Brothers for also just carrying that event. And the Eid Day. I think everyone's waiting for us to make a comment on the Eid Day. Look, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'll make a few comments of what I think everyone wants to hear. Everyone has already come to their conclusion on what happened, what transpired on that day. You know, we're not going to here to change anyone's opinion, and everyone's entitled to their opinion. For what I gather, the vast majority of people agreed or were indifferent to what happened that day. And obviously some people disagreed. But the one observation I do want to make from that day is we have lost the art of engagement with each other. Forget governments, forget everyone else, with each other, we failed how to deal and engage with each other. This council culture needs to stop. I don't want to say any more on that other than that, on that issue other than that comment. And I'll put on to Khalid.
Jazakallah khair, Hajj. And, you know, as you heard, you know, this was all over the past 6 months. And these are more like of the broad activities. Hajj, of course, you know, there's still your day-to-day LMA activities that are ongoing in terms of programs for newly arrived refugees, you know, your essential services, your food bank, your Islamic services, you know, your casework, you know, just a wide range of different services that are pretty much on a Monday to Friday and weekend, you know, schedule. Hajj Jamal, I want to go to you, inshallah. We want to, you know, debrief maybe about some of the points and achievements that Hajj Hafez mentioned. Where do you want to start? You want to start on Eid and work back, or do you want us to start with the other events?
You tell me what you like. We're going to answer everything, so...
Let's get Eid out of the way. So I think, I mean, one of the most, you know, requested question that we got through our social media platforms was, okay, so for the past 2.5 to 3 years, we haven't had any politicians at the Eid prayer in Lakemba Mosque. You know, what has changed, and, you know, is there any reasoning or explanation that you'd, you know, like to just give to the community?
Well, let's start from the main issue that I see post what happened at the Eid, because I think that's more relevant and it leads into what Hajj Hafez was talking about. And I've asked many people who have had issues with the invite. Can we start on the basis of we all believe that all us Muslimin want to get to the same end result? So there's no dispute there. We all want Gaza liberated. We want Palestine free. You know, we all agree on the end outcome that we all want, inshallah. My issue is, why do we have to all be going down the same path in order to get there? Now, this leads to answering your question. For 3 years, the LMA took not only the full brunt, but was leader in terms of disengaging from both all forms of government in terms of the Eid prayers. Because let's not kid ourselves, the politicians wanted to come to Lakemba Mosque in order for the Eid prayers. So we led that path. But then you need to be a realist and say, okay, well, for 2.5 years, what was the end result? Did the war in Gaza stop? It was getting more and more inflamed. It started to spread into Lebanon. Then you have the issue of the rise of the far right, of Pauline Hansons of this world, which disengagement sort of feeds into that narrative that the Muslims will never integrate. So, you know, they don't talk to us. They don't want to. So it feeds into that narrative. And then the most important part is, and this is where this community has to sort of mature a bit and say, the issue is not disengagement. The issue is, how do you engage? And the unfortunate episode that happened on the Eid was, if people just happened to listen to what I was talking about what Hajj Hafez just touched on. And this is not a sort of educated reply. We haven't sort of formulated this reply. This is off the top of our heads. I went out of my way to say the key lesson for us before we even look at the bigger picture is how do we engage? We have to have this mature conversation with ourselves as the Muslim Ummah. How do we engage? On what basis do we engage? What's the rhetoric? What's the form of lobbying do we use? The question for me, and this is me, is not why did we engage? It's the idea was for 2.5 years we disengaged. It achieved what it wanted, what we believed it should, in the sense that it was a shock to the system. But you can only shock the system so much, even in a health sense. You can shock the body so much before there's no more shock anymore. So you have to always constantly be looking at long-term strategy. You can't be just, reactionary all the time. And this is what I felt it was becoming. It became reactionary where, an election had run, the federal election, during the most heated time of Gaza. And the Labor Party won in a landslide. Now, my point is, this engagement can only serve a purpose for so long. It's the answer really is we need to learn to engage as equals and not engage as subservient, like, with all due respect to our fathers used to do. Yes, the politicians would come here, they'd kiss their hand, it was like some huge event, take a photo and leave. That was not the thinking behind the Eid. The thinking was way long-term strategy, in order to be able to not only have some sort of lobbying effect on government in terms of what's happening in the Middle East, but also to be able to access services that this community rightfully should be getting. Now, there's this phobia of grants. We need to get over that phobia. This community has issues that it needs resolved. There are services that we are desperately in need of. Drug rehab. We don't want to admit it, but we do. The aged care centre that we've just got. We've got a youth crisis. That we've got a rampant increase in costs, which most families can't keep up with. So, the food bank doesn't create itself. The government assists in the food bank. People don't want to admit these things. But I don't think the issue is engagement or disengagement. It's building a strategy on how to engage. And that was the point behind engaging again. It was to see how we go about developing a long-term strategy on how do we engage with government in order to achieve results that the community wants long-term. And you won't see them straight away, and you didn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, just touching on that point, there was a very clear strategy, behind it. The pros, cons, everything, was looked at. People were engaged from, different parts of the community with very different views.
Yep.
And it wasn't just, a decision that was made very easily.
100%. And Khalid, look, again, I want to stress, we're not saying we have the answers. I mean, I'm not going to put myself out here saying that, we have all the answers and, we probably could have done things differently. Maybe. Everything is brilliant in hindsight. My issue is similar to what Hajj Hafez touched on, is this concept of absolutism that, I have the absolute truth and if you don't follow me, then you're wrong. We don't have this ability to be able to listen to each other and say, look, as long as we're all on the same end result, then with the different parts don't have an issue. We don't all have to be exactly doing the same thing. And that became the issue that I saw post the Eid, that everyone took a stance of either being accepting or just indifferent or totally objecting. But why do you must totally object? That's my point. I can admit that probably we got some things wrong. We did, but the idea behind it was to develop a long-term strategy. The idea behind it was that the only way that this organisation believed that we could serve the benefit of the community as a whole, including our brothers and sisters overseas, was to be able to learn how to engage with the government in terms of lobbying, not just engaging for the sake of, as everyone said, a photo shot. That wasn't the idea. I mean, if that was the idea, we would have given him a platform when he came. But we sat him down. There was a logic behind it. We sat him down. We said, you can't talk. You got to take your shoes off. Generally, we would have him at the front on a podium talking and lecturing to us. We said, no, you're going to be lectured too. Sheikh Yahya done a brilliant job of lecturing him in Arabic. And I was in the process of trying to do the same in English. But we have to stop being reactionary. We have to be able to plan long-term strategies. And, you can't expect every single thing to happen the way you want it to, and with an absolute, authority on I'm right and all everyone else is wrong. We have to be able to give a bit of tolerance to each other, and that we all have the benefit of the doubt that we all believe that we're all working for the same objective at the end. And we don't necessarily need to walk down that same road in order to get there.
On the mention of objectives, Hajj, let's just go into a little bit. There were a lot of comments made about, you've been mentioning the new LMA, for a while. So can you maybe just give us a brief overview of the objectives of the LMA and, the changes that have been, taking place over the last several years?
Well, let's start with the LMA itself, whether we want to call it the new or the old LMA. Let's call it the old LMA. It's the oldest institution we have, is the Islamic institution. Now, it's like the way I can describe it, the best simile I can give you is if you had a house that is zoned heritage listed. You can't go in there and just bulldozer it down and say, I'm going to start again, I'm going to build something fantastic. The LMA is a very old organisation. It's got very much a entrenched culture, which, this board is only in existence now, Hajj Hafez and myself would be touching on 5 years. Trying to change the most pressing issue is the culture. Is this culture of being, very traditional jam'iyyat, turning it into a corporate culture.
Interrupt you 1 second. For the first 2 years, Gamel, everyone knows all the fight we had to clean the place up. We had legal cases, we had other issues that we had to deal with. So effectively, this board really has had 3 years of constructive work. And where we were 3 years ago to where we are now, it's chalk and cheese. The projects that we've pulled off in the last 3 years don't need me to reiterate and say it again here. Everyone can see it in black and white what's been happened in the last 3 years. Unfortunately, that's sometimes not enough for people. And that's the sad part. If you sat there and you put all our good points on all our bad points, and all the good and the bad we've done, and the positives and negatives, you'll find that the positive and the constructive things outweigh the negatives. So now that's what we're trying to say. Don't come and judge me on what I did today. Judge me overall. What we've done as an overall, and from the beginning to now, I'm happy to be judged. But I'm not going to be judged on a one-off event. That's totally unfair.
Yeah. But look, again, leading into the analogy that I was talking about, and this sort of leads as to what Hajj Hafez was talking about. You've got a heritage listed property. Okay. The LMA is heritage listed, in the sense that it's our oldest organisation. So you've got to be sensitive around about keeping the essential elements, which is what makes LMA so uniquely beautiful. Lakemba Mosque, for example. And then the fact that, it is our oldest organisation, that all forms of politics know that the Lakemba Mosque is the essence. So you can't go in, bulldoze everything and say, I'm going to start again and the new LMA, hip hip hooray, let's all do a hallelujah dance. It has to be slow. Again, it goes back to this issue with our community that we love to condemn each other so quickly. And I've gone on here so many times losing my breath talking about the fact that it's going to be a slow burn. The new LMA, and touching on what Hafez spoke about, for 60 years, the LMA, other than buying building Lakemba Mosque, prior to this board 5 years ago, what had it achieved, what had it delivered to the community? Anyone that has an answer, please tell me. So for 60 years, it gave them Lakemba Mosque. Okay? Then you all of a sudden now to try and impress, not that we're impressing people, but to impress on the point that the new LMA was based on servicing community needs. You've gone into aged care. We're in the process of getting a youth centre. We're in the process, we've purchased 2 mosques as Daweh. We're in the process of turning it into a national brand rather than a Lakemba brand. We're in the process of turning it into an Australia-wide community, not just a specific Lebanese community. These are all services that, and these are ticks that you can say happened in 3 years. 3 years, yet people would want to overlook those very quickly and say, oh yeah, but the LMA, it's had a history of corruption, it's had a history of being, megalomaniac and only men only boards and everything else. I've heard it all. The point is, change does not happen quickly.
especially when you're dealing with old organizations. You know, you're changing a culture. And Allah yahmiyun, our fathers are alive. You know, my father is very reluctant to change anything in the LMA because, you know, that's all he knows. So you've got to be sensitive to these things. People have to appreciate that we aren't starting something from scratch. We're being very sensitive to the culture and to the history of this place, but trying to bring it into line with the corporate culture that is relevant to today.
The thing you want to add also, Jamil, is the projects that we have in the pipeline are quite vast and they're big. The school's like a $28 million project. You know, the domestic violence premise is another $10 million project. All these projects need money, you know, for all due respect to everyone, and they also need government support, in being local, state, federal. It needs support. We can't do this on our own. So yeah, people expect us to provide all these services, but where's the funding going to come from? You know, and I think people need to look at that. Okay, there's a big expectation on the LMA to provide all these services, but at the same time, where do we get the funding from? You know, we need a school for kids with special needs. That's something we don't deal with. Yeah, we brush it under the carpet as a Muslim community. You know, I know a lot of households who have kids with special needs and don't know how to deal with it. And they put them in primary schools and normal schools, and they get lost, these kids. You know, and you know, I've experienced this firsthand. It's not a pleasant experience. So, and we got massive drug issues. It's a massive drug issue. Domestic violence, and before due respect to all of one, it's rampant, and we don't know how to deal with it. You know, and this is where the LMA is heading. We're not purely just a mosque or a Dawi centre or providing service. We're here to provide services from when someone's born, and to their funeral. You know, and everything in between. So that's how I envisage the new LMA. We provide every services across your whole lifespan. And what I expect from the community is not just support us, they can be critical, but support us and see what we're doing. Yeah, and we're happy to take criticism, but don't try and wide ant every single decision we make. You know, understand the decision why it was made, and ultimately any benefit that comes to the LMA is for the community. It's not for us. The LMA is the only organisation which is a waqf. Every asset is owned by the LMA. No one can sell it. No one can transfer it out. It's all owned by the LMA. It's there in black and white.
But can I let me add one thing that Hajj Hafez mentioned, and this is very relevant to every single person that has asked me questions. With all respect to everybody, because I've met so many genuinely beautiful brothers and sisters who have asked me very sincere questions. You know, when you're sitting at home and you're watching the news and you're seeing Gaza, you're seeing Lebanon, you're seeing basically our brothers and sisters being, just not even a human sanctity to them anymore. It's very easy to get onto a Facebook post, a social media post, and start blasting away because you feel better because you're letting it off your chest. But when you have an amani to run an organization, you know, I can't just go out and scream blue murder against the government and against, you know, what's happening in the world and just speak my mind. Because I can do that as an individual. I can't do that when I'm a board director with an amani of an organization. Because those same people are expecting me to provide them a service. You know, when their mothers and fathers die, they don't go questioning the LMA, they ring the LMA. And that's what I find so ironic. You know, the same people who critique you and constantly want to, as Hajj Hafez said, wide ant the LMA, are the same people who will call you and say, by the way, Hajj Jaman, my mother or father died, who do I contact? You know, it's so easy to destroy organizations, and we are perfect at that. You know, this is one thing that the Ummah sadly has learned so well. We love to destroy things. We're very, very reluctant to help build things. And, you know, as I said, if I ever leave this place, inshallah, I will one day, then I can critique it till the cows come home. I can go on my Facebook post and do everything under the sun because there's no ameni behind it. But when I'm holding an ameni to an organization that was nearly, 60 years old, I can't destroy it. There's an ameni to at least leave it in a better place for someone else to come. And that's the difference between somebody critiquing on social media and somebody with an ameni to nurture a place.
Jazakallah khair, Hajj. I mean, you just mentioned, what's briefly, touched upon the Middle East and what's happening, over there. Do you want to give a little bit of an update in terms of, what the LMA is doing in relation to shedding light on this situation?
The funny thing is, what happened as a result of the Eid was $5 million was given to Lebanon the next day as aid, the very next day from the Eid outcome. People don't want to look at that, but that's a reality. So you can badmouth engagement as much as you want, but our ummah needs some form of aid at the moment. So if that comes, if that was an outcome on its own, well, alhamdulillah, because that's $5 million Lebanon got that would never have got. And I'm sitting here in Australia living my luxury life and not feeling the pain. But then when your brothers and sisters are in Lebanon are suffering, well, that's a different story. So that's number one. Number two, look, and I laugh, and it's a genuine laugh of frustration. We are the LMA. We're not the Australian government. People have such a high expectation that, we do the best we can. We always lead in press releases. We never shy away from critiquing government decisions. We lobby government like you wouldn't believe constantly about the issues that are happening in Gaza and Lebanon. But people have to have a realistic expectation that we are 3% of the Australian population, and the LMA is a minute part of the Muslim population. So, don't expect miracles. And our community needs to be realistic in what it wishes for. We can lobby government the best we can in terms of the geopolitics, but if people genuinely, hand on heart, believe Albanese can change the situation in Gaza or in Lebanon, again, let's be real. The best we can do is to keep on lobbying and pressuring that the Australian government can use whatever power it has in the UN to put pressure on the ones who are really causing the fitna in the Middle East. That's the best we can hope for, sadly. And that only comes via lobbying. And you can't lobby if you don't engage. So it's a catch-22. The same people who are criticizing you because nothing's changing in Gaza and in Lebanon, the only way you can do it is to lobby and put pressure on government, but then they don't want you to engage with them either. And that's what I was talking about. It's an ethical engagement. It's not just engaging for a photo opportunity. It's actually ethical engagement. It's engaging for the betterment of your community. But that's long-term strategy. That doesn't happen the first time you meet the Prime Minister and you expect him to eat from your lap. That's not going to happen. But it involves investing in long-term strategy of engaging with government, lobbying government, and not to be beholden to government. Because that's the other thing that we get accused of, that we're somehow beheld to government. But you show me any other organisations in terms of its public press releases that has been the most critical of policy that affected Lebanon or Gaza, other than more than the LMA, sorry.
Jazakallah khair, Hajj. Hajj, let's move on a little bit just in terms of Melbourne and Adelaide.
Yep.
Let's go into a little bit more details over there. We've been down to Melbourne, we've been down to Adelaide.
Call it by its name. I love the names. This is
give an intro, Hajj.
Okay. Let me just, because this is I think the most proudest thing I've ever done, me personally, was when I joined. I remember there was Imam Ali Mosque, there was Abu Bakr Mosque, and there was Uthman. And I always thought, well, what happened? It's how I forget Abu Bakr.
We didn't have Abu Bakr, remember? We didn't have Abu Bakr.
Yeah, and I always thought, but why? What happened? Who was doing the counting and forgot? So Melbourne, the Melbourne Mosque is now officially Abu Bakr al-Siddiq Mosque. And Adelaide was something that we all believed was beautiful because everyone has a soft spot for Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, because he's the first thing you learn when you start getting into Islamic history, and he's one person that unites both the Western culture and the Eastern culture, because even the West love him, because he was such a person of high morals. And we thought, what a better way to open the first mosque in the CBD of Adelaide than someone who unites, who crosses borders from both East and Western cultures, than Salahuddin al-Ayyubi.
It's like the Crusades.
Yeah.
It's the first mosque in Adelaide. So and Adelaide is known as the city of churches. To call it Salahuddin Ayyubi Mosque is very
Yeah, symbolic.
Significant.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, there's so many Sahaba, and part of the guilt of naming mosques is that you remember so many Sahaba that you personally love. I call them a Walid. I'd love to call a mosque, call them a Walid, but how many mosques can you? But the point really is, mosques are not a money-making business. You don't go buying a mosque to make money. So the people who want to throw this dispersion on the LMA or the new LMA, whatever LMA you want to call, the idea of acquiring mosques or churches and converting them into mosques is to create a national body in order to be able to, guess what? Lobby government. That's the idea. The idea is if you become a national body on your own, so you're not amalgamated with others like Anik and Afik, but you're one national body who has branches in every single state, then you can effectively go to government and lobby them and say, mate, you want to upset all of Australia, the Australian Muslims? Well, we have mosques in every state. So again, it's long-term strategy. And I know it doesn't appease everybody. It's not going to appease everyone's my replies today. But I can only tell you what I genuinely believe, what the path we're heading down. And to me, it's long-term strategy and chipping away at the old system. And part of that was to acquire mosques, and inshallah, we'll be acquiring more. I'll leave that to Hafez to break.
I don't want to give too much away today. Look, we are in the process of acquiring another property, quite a substantial property, but I don't want to give away too much yet until we formally exchange on it. But alhamdulillah, it's going to be quite significant.
Yeah, and every single person that is criticizing the Jam'iyyah today, I will promise you, someone in their family will be using that centre. And this is the thing, I keep saying you can criticize as much as you want, but this organisation has really matured in terms of providing the services for the fourth and fifth generations now. Not only is it getting into aged care, like yourself, Hajj Khalid, psychology. Another thing that we have a frowned upon in our community, but we have a huge need for psychological assistance. What we're experiencing in our lifetime in terms of what we're seeing overseas needs psychological help. I need psychological. When I turn on the TV, I can't turn on Facebook anymore because I get so turned off by what I see. But those services don't come willingly and freely and just, whatever may happen. You need organisations to be able to provide those. So psychology, I challenge any person to name me a family they know is affected by drugs, because every family somehow knows someone who's affected by drugs. Drug rehab doesn't come for free. It's very expensive. You can testimony to that. Now, we need to be able to start somewhere. So at least we're heading in that right path. Now, what Hajj Hafez didn't talk about was also the fact that at a very, very large cost, we've established the first and only Al-Azhar College. Why? Because we're trying to grow homegrown mashayikh in order to give da'wah and in order to grow the da'wah for the community, a service, again, that's been lacking. Because we do need to grow our own mashayikh who speak English and can reach our youth. With all due respect to the elder sheikh, they're not able to touch the youth anymore.
Jazakallah khair, Hajj. I think, just a quick summary on all of that was there's a lot of projects that are taking place behind the scenes, a lot of initiatives that are in the works. And, inshallah, we ask everyone for their patience to see the results with them. But behind the scenes, we ask everyone, inshallah, that, you have to have the good faith and trust, the people or the community over here at the LMA, inshallah, that there's a lot of work taking place behind the scenes, that the results will be, very visible over the next couple of years.
Hajj Hafez mentioned something very important. I'm not asking people to trust us blindly. The beauty of the LMA is its board has to be elected every 3 years. Judge us at the end of that period. And then if you don't like it, vote us out. And this is the beauty of this place. You just get rid of them. I mean, which other organisation can say that it can remove a board and change that board? That's number one. Number two, judge by the fruit, not by the seeds that you're seeing today. Judge by the fruit. If you don't see the LMA getting any better than it was, say, 5 years ago, then you have every right to be critical then. But judge based on the fruit that you see, not on the seeds that we're sowing today, and saying, I don't like the seeds. Judge on the fruit that it bears,
Look,
inshallah.
we've helped a lot of organisations in the last 3 to 5 years, and I'm not going to get the detail. They all know who they are. And sometimes we've worked with other organisations to the detriment of the LMA. But because we believed in the cause, we've put our neck on the line, and we'll continue to do that, to be honest. You know, if we believe in an issue, if you don't believe wholeheartedly in an issue, we'll go all the way in it. You know, if people want to come and criticise us that, you know, we're pandering to anyone, we don't pander to anyone. If we believe in a project or an issue, we'll follow it all the way through. And if anyone has any questions or any issues, pick up the phone and speak to us. So come to the LMA, speak to us. You know, with all due respect to everyone, people who want to write stuff on Facebook or on WhatsApp group, that's not constructive. You know, it just, you know, like we confronted a few people after one person, I confronted him at a gym. He made some comments on Facebook. He goes, I didn't mean it. I said, well, so what'd you write it for? This is, if you've got any issues, just pick up the phone, send us an email, send us a message. We're happy to sit down and have a coffee and have a frank discussion. But, you know, we are not going to accept people bad-mouthing us on radio, you know, on Facebook and all these other social media. You know, look, we've got nothing to hide. You know, our financials are on ACNC. People can have a look at them. You know, all the assets we've bought, they're in an LMA's name. You can do a title search on it. All our projects are there. So we've got nothing to hide. Our conscience is clear, and hopefully that people can see that. And if they don't want to see, that's fine. And we're happy for them to come, pick up the phone and have a chat to us.
Alhamdulillah. Isha, Adhan is very soon, inshallah, in about 15 minutes or so. So any final comments or anything before we wrap up, inshallah?
Let me just add to what Hajj Hafez said. You know, the one thing I'm proud of the organisation, and you know, I like calling the organisation, and that's something, again, judge me on the fruit, inshallah, on that one. But the one thing I love about the organisation is that, have you ever seen the LMA badmouth another organisation? Publicly, privately, disown any other Islamic organisation, you know. And this is the beautiful thing about this place. And this is what happens when you're a sheikh, because the Jam'iyyah to me is the sheikh. It's the elder. It's learnt how to be diplomatic with the other organisations. It never imposes its will on anyone else. It never says that you've got to follow this way or the highway. It's always gone into the moderate area when it comes to the mashaykh that it brings in here and the ethos that it exposes. I love this. That's what I love about this organisation. That, you know, it's weathered a storm of criticism, but it's never lashed back and criticised others. Organisations. It's never said no, and I challenge any organisation that's listening to this where they've come and asked, can we have a donation for Friday prayers, and we said no. Never ever did we ever say to any organisation, we don't even know them. Half the people, God knows, Allahu Alam, who we gave it to, but they came with a pamphlet saying we want to build a mosque in wherever, and we said yeah. Ahla sahla. And this is the beauty of this place, and again it comes back to the culture, so it's not all bad. There's certain parts of this organisation's culture that is beautiful, that is always kept the wasat, the middle ground. It's always been an arm of sort of the elderly that likes to keep the things wrapped up inside the family home. It's when there's disputes between organisations, it's played the role of trying to mediate. And that's the beautiful thing about being an old organisation, that, you know, you have this ability to say, look, I know who I am, I'm comfortable in my skin, and I don't need to critique everything and everyone. We should adopt that same culture. That's something we all need to learn to adopt. Because as I said, it's so easy to knock down organisations. You need to rebuild them. And sometimes rebuilding doesn't happen as quick as you want it to, sadly. But that's preserving the amenity that you have running an organisation, and two, the organisation itself. It deserves a respect. You know, Lekemba Mosque deserves to be respected, and you can't just knock it down and say, oh, let's start again and make it bigger. Because again, you're not preserving the heritage and the culture that this place has. And I ask people to think of that. You know, don't publicly shame an organisation that you may not agree. If you don't agree, I think my numbers everywhere. Like, I get Aussies calling me now. Call me. If you want to raise a concern, there's nothing more Islamic than saying, I'll give you the Hathan al-Zan. Can I sit down with you and have a coffee and you can explain this to me? I've never said no to anybody. The Hafez has just made the same offer. Don't critique on Facebook. If you don't like something, either come and join the organisation and change it, or pick up the phone and discuss a point. And we're happy to raise it because there's nothing concealed. Everything is open to be looked at.
Jazakallah khair, Hajj. Thank you, Hajj Hafez, Hajj Gamel, for joining us tonight. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in, inshallah. If you have any further questions, queries, anything, feel free to email us, get in touch with us, inshallah. And we'll be in touch soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.